Welcome to the ReGenerate podcast, exploring the regenerative movement in all aspects of life to revitalize, restore, and re-energize for a better world. I'm your host, Jenna, so stoked to have you here. Let's regenerate together. Hey everybody, and welcome to the show. You are in for a treat today as we have Kristyn from Emmer Earth joining us. She is a functional medicine coach that uses regenerative practices. And in our discussion today, we dive into her experience with conventional farming in the United States, her journey into a more holistic lifestyle, and integrating soil literacy in her practice with regard to understanding the effects of pesticides and herbicides, understanding microbes and the gut microbiome, and ends off with some amazing tips and tricks for how you can integrate a more regenerative lifestyle. She's an absolute gem to talk to, and I'm super stoked for you guys to check this out. So this is Kristyn from Emmer Earth. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the ReGenerate podcast. I am here today with Kristyn from Emmer Earth. She's joining us all the way from Scotland, so super stoked to have you here. Welcome, Kristyn.
Yeah, thanks, Jenna. I'm really glad to be here with you today. Excited for our conversation, what we're going to chat about.
Yeah, for sure. So you are in St. Andrews, Scotland, which to my knowledge is a bustling old university town, and
Yes.
You are a functional medicine coach, a soil advocate. You use farm to body practices. So yeah, just give us a quick overview of, who you are and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Jenna said, I am a functional medicine certified health coach. And so essentially what that means is I work with people who are dealing with all kinds of things in the world. And that could be anything from experiencing major health issues to I just want to live a healthier life. Functional medicine health coaching, I suppose, is looking at root cause approaches to healthcare. So what is it that's causing illness or disease, and how do we change our environment and the daily practices that we go about to be healthier? And I do a lot of that work thinking through how do we live regeneratively. And in my journey came across regenerative agriculture as another model in the world that's very similar to functional medicine, which I know we'll talk about later a little bit more and dive into that idea. But yeah, so that is me in a little nutshell. I also do some work with the university here that in St. Andrews with students and their well-being, and I'm excited to talk more about what I'm up to.
Yeah, so that's amazing, and I definitely want to dive into the regenerative practices you use, the solutions you have. But before that, I know that you grew up on a conventional farm in the United States, and I would love for you to kind of share with us kind of what that was like. Maybe some things people don't really understand about conventional farming with regards to like commodity crops. I know there's the FFA and 4-H program. So yeah, maybe just like help paint a picture of what that was like for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm originally from Wisconsin, so a very small town in southeastern Wisconsin, and it's a farming community. I mean, people drove tractors to school and their snowmobile to school on occasion. And so it was really part of the culture there, and farming was very much part of the culture. Now, the thing that I reflect on a lot now compared to then is you would think in a location like that, there would be farmers markets and lots of things to do with agriculture and food and things like that, which was true. We did have a lot to do with agriculture. Again, you mentioned FFA, and you mentioned, quite a few of the organizations that I'm thinking of county fairs at the moment. And so it is a very agricultural place, but I never felt like food was part of the conversation. And I didn't really realize that when I was in it. And so, yeah, I basically, I grew up pretty much adjacent to a farm. So I wasn't necessarily exactly on the farm, but one of the things that I think a lot of people may or may not know about conventional farming in the United States particularly is a lot of it is very regulated by the government. And so when you drive through, I mean, anywhere in the Midwest, but really anywhere in the United States, and I don't know what it's like where you are, Jenna, but you're going to see the same thing. And you see what we know as commodity crops. And so it's probably corn or hay or soybeans or things like that. And a lot of that comes down to that's what the Farm Bill in the United States tells farmers what they can grow. And the Farm Bill is connected to insurance, which is connected to what happens, like what are sort of the backups for farmers in case the weather doesn't cooperate in a particular year, or there's some kind of tragedy that ruins their crop or things like that. And they have to work within these specific guidelines. And that's with the seeds they plant and what they're growing and how they're growing it. And so it becomes a very regulated, agriculture becomes very regulated. Now, where that becomes an issue, and things, again, that I didn't really know, is that farming to your local area is incredibly important if we're going to talk about ecosystem, but that doesn't happen. So the same type of farming or a similar type of farming that happens in Wisconsin is also going to happen in Nebraska, and it's also going to happen in Minnesota. And so you start to see that there is less of a local flair on what farming looks like, and it becomes more of a national issue. Now, all of this is tied together. So what we call big ag, or, you know, the industry of agriculture, ties into our food system, and that food system ties into how humans interact with that, which then brings in the pharmaceutical companies. And so this spiral just kind of keeps going, and there's more people involved. And so, yeah, I would say it's a very different world than what we might think. I think when we think of farmers, we're like, oh, the vegetables and feeding America and all that kind of stuff. But really, most of the farmers that you see from the road are probably growing corn that's going to your cars, or it's going to animals, or it's going to high fructose corn syrup. And so it's not actually feeding America, was what we would say in the United States. So hopefully that gives a little bit of a picture. Kind of went on a bit of a
No, that was absolutely, yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah.
So I think what a lot of people generally misunderstand is that, you know, when you drive by all these farms in the United States, which I've done multiple road trips, is that a lot of these farms, yeah, they're not producing food for their country. They're actually producing kind of these major crops for other items, such as like gas for your car, things like that. So I'm really glad you highlighted that.
Yeah. Well, what's really interesting is in the United States, and again, I know this is very like US centric here in this conversation, but there's only 3% of the land that's actually used to grow vegetables that humans eat. Most people don't know that, like 3%. That's such a small amount of land when we think about how massive the United States is and how much of that land could be used for growing food. So, yeah.
Oh, wow. That definitely paints a huge picture. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that with us. And I think it's probably very similar in multiple areas of the world. I know we have some of that in Canada for sure. And you do my best to really try and connect to the local farms in the area that are producing food for, you know, for their region. So yeah, thank you. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Very informative. So moving into your kind of journey into regenerative solutions. I want to talk about your, you know, what is functional medicine and how you've integrated that with regenerative agriculture.
Yeah. So I suppose I can start a little bit backing up to my story, because I think everyone who comes into functional medicine, whether that's a functional medicine doctor or a coach or a chiropractor who's working in functional medicine, pretty much anybody, they always have a story. And so just the very quick backstory of me is that grew up in a household that went for, you know, medication or, you know, Band-Aid type approaches to healthcare, which was fine at the time. But when I got into college and became a lot more stressed, went through grad school, ended up at the end of grad school with a pretty intense season of burnout, or what we might call adrenal dysregulation in the functional medicine world, and went to a number of different doctors who thought, oh, well, maybe it's your thyroid, and so here's some medication. And I thought, it just doesn't feel quite right. Found some doctors who decided they wanted to do some food allergy testing, and And that worked for a little bit, but didn't quite fit the bill. And I kept feeling like I was getting these Band-Aid approaches to healing until I came across a functional medicine nutritionist who she assessed me for, all of about 10 minutes and said, I think we have a solution here. And essentially what she did is she put me on a massive lifestyle change, changed my diet, cleaned that up a whole lot, started resting really for the first time in my life, changed the way I moved. And I say change because I actually didn't exercise more. And we can talk about that a little bit later. But so she really helped me think through what is the perfect environment for my body and for my unique makeup, and ended up being able to heal from that really intense season of burnout. And then I started getting curious about that, like, well, how are we healing people based on their lifestyle factors and not just handing out a prescription or a Band-Aid or whatever it is. Sometimes those things are needed, but a lot of the time it's not. So I decided that I wanted to be part of this, and decided that I am passionate about health and the ways that we live in the world. Now, went through a functional medicine training program for coaches and became a coach. Now, the journey to the regenerative part of that came from reflecting on my story, really. As I was thinking through what is it that I want to be able to help people with? And it's really, I want people to be able to live well in the world we have today. And not just live well, like survive, but I want people to be able to live better. And through that research and through thinking through that, plus my story of growing up in a farming community, I thought these two things have to be connected. So functional medicine, I kind of said this earlier, is really a root cause approach to healthcare. So what is it about the environment that we find ourselves in? So some people talk about it as like community healthcare because we're all connected, or like a systems healthcare because there's lots of parts and pieces. It's not just one thing that might be off or wrong. And really, I think it speaks to how does the body and the environment work together to create health. Now, as I was searching through this, and thinking about agriculture a lot and where our food comes from, and food is so important when we think about health. It's not the only thing, but it is an incredibly important thing. I came across regenerative organic agriculture and realized after I was going through some of the information, learning more about it, that it's really the same concept applied to a different area. So regenerative agriculture is essentially a root cause approach to growing food, and to how does growing food in this ecosystem, in this environment, help the food be better and the environment be better. And people are absolutely integral to that system in a way that is symbiotic and not hierarchical, if that makes sense. So so that's sort of how I got into it. And so I've been exploring, what do regenerative practices in our life look like, and how do we as humans connect back to an agricultural sort of mindset or agricultural participation. Wendell Berry talks about how eating is an agricultural act, and I love that because we all eat and therefore are all participating in agriculture. And so it really is time that we start talking about not only what kind of food we're eating, but how the food we're eating is grown.
Yeah. It's so important. And I actually connected with you through Instagram and Dr. Zach Bush, who talks a lot about the herbicides and the pesticides found in the soil and how that's directly impacting our human health. So I was really curious to kind of how you integrate soil literacy, so to speak, into your practice, and what sort of things are you doing with your clients to educate them on soil health, if you're doing that, or are you going to farms? Like, what sort of things do you do in your specific to soil health?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jenna. So I would say it's ever evolving, but probably the two things I speak most about with people are are pesticides and herbicides and sort of the chemical side of food. Well, I should say food and their world. But then also talking a lot about the microbiome and the importance of the non-human living things that help us to be human. So if it's okay, I'll touch on both of those. So the first part is about toxins, essentially. So we live in an increasingly toxic world. And one of those areas is we encounter toxins through our food all of the time, unless we are very diligent with our food and where it comes from and how it's grown. But one of the things, Jenna, that you had just mentioned is glyphosate, and that is the active ingredient in Roundup, which is the top pesticide in the world, pretty much, like top used pesticide in the world. Billions of pounds are sprayed on the world every year, billions upon billions. Like I can't even conceptualize how much that is in my head when I think about it. Now, the interesting part about this is, Monsanto, who is the owner of Roundup, has said that glyphosate is not harmful to human health. It has a very short life. And so it basically does its job, and then it goes away, for a very simple term there. And we know that's actually not true. It's a water soluble chemical, and so it stays in our water systems. And when we think about our body as mostly water, glyphosate ends up staying in the body. Now, why is that a problem? It's a problem for a number of different ways. I think if we were looking in the ground, glyphosate messes up. So we'll get to microbes in a second, but it not only kills all life that's really around, but it also messes up something called the shikimate pathway. Now, the shikimate pathway is incredibly important. I would recommend going to look it up and doing some research on it. But basically, that is a pathway that allows for essential amino acids to be present in our food. Now, when we talk about essential amino acids, we can think about that as essential. We need these amino acids from our food, and they play a big role in our body, in the functioning of our body. Now, glyphosate is really cutting off that pathway so that it doesn't show up in our food. And if it doesn't show up in our food, then it doesn't show up in our bodies. And if it doesn't show up in our bodies, then we have a major problem. So that's just one of the very small ways that it can impact our body. But glyphosate is also, as you were mentioning, Jenna, through Dr. Zach Bush's research that he's been doing over the past many years with the microbiome, has found that glyphosate breaks down the lining of our gut, which then causes a whole host of other issues. So when our gut lining breaks down, and that is, it's where a lot of health is located, is in our gut. When our gut breaks down, we can experience issues from brain fog all the way to some what's the word I'm looking for? I'm going to go with a different word. Anyway, things like ALS or something to do with neurons in our body, and everything in between. So that could be upset stomach, it could be rashes on our skin, it could be depression, anxiety. All of these things can be tied back to a breakdown of our gut lining, which can be tied into glyphosate or pesticide use within our food system. So I do a lot of work educating about that, and thinking through, well, how clean is the food that we're eating? Because we could be eating all of the tomatoes and all of the carrots and celery and broccoli and kale that we want, but if it's covered in pesticides, then it's actually potentially making it worse and making our guts worse. So it's really thinking through, it's not just what we're eating, but the quality of what we're eating. The other part of that is microbes. And so it's really hard to not talk about the gut and not talk about microbes. So the fascinating thing that I just love about our world, and the more I learn about soil health, the more I'm so excited about this, is that you learn that really we are not actually as human as we think we are. So I say that, and I'm sure some people are thinking what? So we are covered in microbes. covered in them from head to toe, and viruses and fungi and all kinds of other very peculiar little beings that we cannot see. Now, microbes have the ability to exchange information between each other and to exchange information with their own cells. So the interesting part about that is if you and I were to give each other a hug, we would be sharing our microbiome. So some of my microbes would go to you and some of your microbes would come to me. And then the information that was being shared on you would now be being shared on me, and vice versa. And then, we'd pick up information from our environment and about who we're around and all that kind of stuff, which is fascinating if you think about health and how we're so connected, and how actually the things that we're all doing do impact one another because they impact this mass microbiome that we're all part of. So one of the greatest things that we can do as individuals is care for our microbes. And it sounds funny, but it's true. It's making sure that we foster an environment where we can have as many diverse microbes as possible. Now, how do we do that? Is we get foods that, let's say, are fermented, because we know fermented foods have lots of wild type microbes in them that help diversify our gut. We eat a variety of different foods, right? So it's not always eating the same thing for breakfast or the same thing for lunch or the same thing for dinner over and over again. It's switching those things up. It's eating seasonally and locally, because the microbes that are in your local microbiome are the ones that are going to help strengthen you the most for when there might be illnesses that come around or things like that. And so it can be really immune boosting in that way. So I talk a lot about microbes and the impact that has in our body. So yeah, those are probably the two big ones that I spend a lot of time on.
Yeah, no, and I think it's really up and coming into the the medical world and the holistic world, that understanding kind of this other element we've forgotten with regard to soil and glyphosate. I know personally I got very passionate about it, and its original patents being an antibiotic, which speaks to killing all this biotic life and going into and being water soluble, so it's able to enter the water systems. And you can test basically any water around and you'll find traces of glyphosate, which is pretty mind-blowing. So I think the work you're doing is really amazing, and I'm super excited to see where you go with Emmer Earth.
Oh, thank you.
So I know on your website you talked a little bit about kind of how you came to the name Emmer Earth. And I'd love for you to share that, because I thought it was really special, kind of going back to your family roots and kind of the background on your name.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, this was one of those, I had sticky notes out as I was trying to think through, what do I want to call all of this and what I'm doing and building. I had sticky notes and I just started writing words and sticking them on the wall. And the two that really stood out were Emmer and Earth. Now, Emmer is my last name. It's my maiden name. And Emmer is a type of wheat. And I actually didn't know that until I moved to Europe. And then found out that, my last name is actually an agricultural symbol, basically. And so Emmer wheat is one of the oldest types of wheat that we have. It's not the oldest, but one of the oldest. And it's a very durable, sturdy wheat. And so it can grow in really rough places. And I love this image of life sprouting where it seems like life couldn't be grown. And so it's very resilient in that way. The structure of it makes it so that even people who are, let's say, gluten intolerant can take Emmer wheat. And so it's very versatile and accommodating to our bodies, which I think is also pretty cool. So learned a lot more about the Emmer side of things. So I just thought that was like a symbol of a lot of different things when I think about coaching and growing and maybe taking a very desolate situation, right? When we're not in good health, it can feel like a hopeless state in some ways. But there's a lot of life that can come from that hopeless state. And then the earth part of it is really the connection back to land. I think I've become a lot more sentimental about my grandparents' farm, which is just outside of my hometown. And this is a place that I've spent tons and tons and tons of time, which makes me feel like a farm kid, even though I didn't grow up directly on a farm. But I do think there is something worth stewarding the place that we're in. I do believe that community is a huge part of our health, and not just community in terms of people, but community in terms of the land that we're on and the community of all kinds of life that lives there. And so that's really the earth part of it. And so it's being connected to people and place, and sort of that agricultural or that like earthy, like we are all one, we're connected to the earth. So that's really where that part of it came from. So
yeah, and I think you use the term reciprocity.
Yes,
one of your main themes or main goals. So if you could speak to kind of that element as well within your business.
Yeah. So, and I know that Jenna is reading this book, but if you ever need a book recommendation, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Kimmerer is one of the best books I've ever read. And it is an entire book about reciprocity with the earth. And I think the part that I love about that is we as humans have gotten into this mindset where we think that we're the top of the food chain, we're the most important being on earth, that we are the ones that get to make the decision. But really, that's not true. We're part of a web. And actually, we should be thanking our microbes. One of the things, especially these days, that makes my skin crawl is the intense use of antimicrobial gels and sprays and soaps and all that kind of stuff, because it's very counterproductive. If we're trying to be healthier and grow our immune system, we need more microbes. We need to diversify them, not kill them. But this is what happens when humans have an incorrect relationship with the earth and what we're doing. So reciprocity is really this, we can take from the earth and the earth gives generously to us, but what are we giving back to it? So what kind of attention are we giving it back? And so Robin Kimmerer just paints some beautiful pictures throughout her entire book about what that looks like. But I really think it's thinking two ways or multiple ways about how we interact, not just with other humans, but with the earth and the environment around us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really beautiful. And I think as soon as that reconnection starts to happen, there'll be, any individual kind of experience a wide variety of changes, whether that's physical, emotional, spiritual. So when I read that about kind of your values and what you're doing, I was like, wow, I would definitely want to chat with you about that. Cause I think it's really important and really special.
Yeah. Love that.
Before we kind of get going and off today, I would love to just, add some value added to our audience and what are some tips and tricks that an individual can do to create a more regenerative lifestyle?
Yeah, love that question. And I love thinking through this as like regenerative practices and regenerative lifestyles. There's really, when I think about the word regenerative, it's to become over and over again. And so it's more of a cyclical or symbiotic homeostasis. I mean, these are the types of words that sort of go through my head. The thing I also love about when I think about regenerative practices is it's not just sustaining what's already there, but it's actually making better, which I love. And I love when I think about the soil and regenerative organic agriculture is because the term regenerative means that we can not only just sustain the soil, because that's what sustainability would mean, but we can actually make it better. We can grow this and we can become healthier. So just because we were given a diagnosis or we were given a particular health condition doesn't mean that we're stuck there, because we can use regenerative practices to maybe not completely eliminate something, but we can certainly, again, improve it and bring more life to it. So some of the things that I would say is really thinking about food. And I talk about food a lot because I love food. I think it's fascinating how food is grown. If you've never grown something, I would say just get just a plant potter and just grow something. Could be some herbs or a small plant or I don't know, any kind of vegetable, because when you really watch the process from seed to something you could actually eat, it connects you to the earth in a way that almost nothing else could. So, but it's thinking through, where are you buying your food? What kind of food are you consuming? So is that and farmers markets? And are you looking for organic, even if it's not everything, that buying organic, like at least some things. So in the United States, we have the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. So it's what are the foods that are, when they're grown, they use the least amount of pesticides and herbicides. That's the Clean 15. The Dirty Dozen are the ones that use the most pesticides and they're the most toxic for you. That Dirty Dozen really are those are the things that you should be buying organic. So I don't know, Jenna, do you have anything like that in Canada?
So I follow both those things.
Yeah.
Because a lot of our food in Canada actually comes from the United States,
Yeah.
or is packaged in the United States and comes from Mexico. So I think also speaking to taking a look at those labels and trying to figure out where actually your food comes from is another big piece of it. Because you think it's coming from somewhere, but it's actually been packaged here. Who knows, might have come from Asia. So I think another thing to highlight is actually, take a look at the labels, see where your food's actually coming from, and then start giving that a thought, like, whoa, what journey did that banana take to come? Or, you know what I mean?
Yes, totally. There's a great book, again, if you're a reader, would love to just offer up another recommendation. The book Animal Vegetable Miracle by Barbara Kingsolver. It reads like a story, it reads like a journal, but it's a woman who basically decided to eat locally and seasonally for an entire year, which meant she couldn't eat bananas because she was in Virginia and they don't grow bananas in Virginia. But really talked through how her and her family managed that. And so I think you're exactly right. I was grocery shopping last week in the grocery store here in Scotland and came across apples from the United States. And I just thought it would be so weird for me to buy apples from the US in Scotland. Like I can't wrap my mind around that, but that's another thing. So food I would say is incredibly important. Movement is a very regenerative practice. And I talk about movement. I don't say exercise because I think exercise can sometimes feel like a chore, but it is getting out and getting around. I think especially if you can get outside, we know that that movement will pull toxins out of the body. We know that it regenerates our brain function when we can move and breathe. And especially if we can get outside, we're interacting with our natural environment. But we're also doing something called, we could be doing something. If you take your shoes off and put them on the earth, we're doing something called grounding. And grounding really regulates our body systems in ways that nothing else can. So our body has, it's such a cool concept. So again, probably don't have time to really dive into it today, but grounding or earthing, I would highly recommend to go look it up because it is like, I think one piece of evidence that shows the earth wants to take care of us and that we are not separate from the earth because it will regulate us. Water is another one. And Jenna has been schooling me about water a little bit here, which has been great. But water is incredibly important. And in thinking through, where are you getting your water and how is it structured, which is what I'm learning from Jenna. I would say for sure, just a very basic first step that you could do today is get yourself a water filter of some sort, like a charcoal water filter. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but most tap water in North America, most tap water really anywhere in a developed area it's going to have toxins, contaminants, pharmaceuticals, pesticides, herbicides, all that kind of stuff in it. And so we think, the tap water is fine. The tap water is rarely fine for lots of reasons. So at the very least, make sure to get yourself some kind of water filter. I would say connection to place. And so thinking through who's your community, where is the ground you stand on, and how are you connected to that place? Because when we're connected to place, we become much more involved in it. We care more about it. And that connection really helps our whole body and all of the system keep going. And again, it is a regenerative practice. Rest is another one. So sleeping, or at least taking time to rest. So not working all the time, doing something that really brings you life and joy, but also sleep is incredibly regenerative. It's where we integrate, we eliminate toxins in our sleep. We integrate memory and learning in our sleep. We recalibrate lots of systems. There's a term or a phrase, and I can't remember who said this. So if anybody's listening and knows who said this, but it's basically says that sleep is the only time that our ego is removed from our body, and it allows our body's wisdom to take over to heal ourselves. And I think that the idea of like, I'm not trying to think my way into better health. I'm just allowing my body space to do that. And that happens when we sleep. Purpose and creativity is another one. So thinking about how are you being creative in the world? And that could be a number of different things. I'm not talking about art. I'm talking about, do you like cooking? Are you amazing with your relationships and are creative in your relationships? Are you, it's being so passionate about something that you overflow, and the only thing you can do with that overflow is create with it. So what are the things that are bringing you purpose and passion and creativity in your life? Because those cycles are regenerative in itself to give you energy. And then one of the ones that we talked about, just one of the last ones, is trying to live at the lowest toxin level as possible. So thinking about toxins in your home, I think the two biggest ones are beauty products, especially for women, and your cleaning supplies. So I clean my home with two things. I have an essential oil mix and vinegar, and those are about the two things I clean with in my house. And in terms of beauty products, I decided makeup wasn't for me, but there are some great, if you are someone who loves makeup, there are some really great companies out there who do really clean makeup. But thinking through, what are the soaps that I'm using, the deodorants, the hair products that I'm using, the makeup that I'm using, the lotions. I mean, there's so many things that are considered toxins, and it's a very unregulated area that really messes with our regenerative capacity as humans. So that was kind of a quick fire round, but lots of things to do to be regenerative in our world.
Wow. I mean, you are speaking right to my heart, right to my soul. I am so happy that I've been able to connect with you and you were able to join us today. I think you're totally on the right path. I can hear it in your voice.
Oh, thanks, Jenna.
That this is what this is the message that you're meant to spread. And I know it's the same for me. So thank you so much for joining us today. Is there any last little tidbits you want to mention before we sign off?
Last little tidbits, I would say, I love this conversation, and I don't know if you're going to add in where they can be connected more, but I'm on mostly Instagram, Emmer and Earth on Instagram. EmmerandEarth.com is my website. So would love for you to engage in those places and to continue this conversation, because as Jenna said, very passionate about this. I think it's an area that is just now starting to come together. And I think we need more voices in it, and would love for anybody listening to be part of that conversation.
Yes, well, I'll absolutely include kind of your info in the show notes, so to speak. And everyone, please check out her Instagram, her website. And I think we'll definitely connect again soon. Maybe we'll have you on again as the show progresses and see where you're at in a few months, few years, who knows.
Cool.
I wish you all the best. And thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Jenna. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for joining us on the ReGenerate podcast. If you're interested in checking out more of our content, please subscribe to the channel. You can also visit us on YouTube at ReGenerate Co. You can send us an email, regenerateco@gmail.com. And if you're interested in connecting with me, Jenna, the host, you can find me on Instagram at Jenna Thornburg. So thanks for joining us.